When we hear "we the people," that iconic opening line of the U.S. Constitution,
Mm.
it immediately conjures images of American ideals, doesn't it?
It really does. It's so familiar.
But here's the thought I want to plant right away.
Hmm.
What does that phrase really mean, like today, in the 21st century?
Mm.
Because today, we're embarking on a deep dive into that very document, the U.S. Constitution, designed brilliantly back in 1787
Right.
for a nation so vastly different from the one we live in now.
And it is a remarkable piece of enduring governance, truly. No doubt about that. But the core tension, the thing we're really exploring today, is its capacity to adapt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can a framework built for a horse and buggy era, can it truly serve an AI-driven, globally interconnected world that changes at, well, warp speed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. And that's the mission of this deep dive.
Mhm.
We're going to unpack a compelling diagnosis of the Constitution's inherent rigidity, why it's so incredibly hard to change,
Mhm.
and the surprising, maybe even frustrating consequences this has for American democracy right now.
Mhm.
Then we'll pivot, looking at strategic pathways for constitutional renewal. And we'll draw some fascinating parallels between our current challenges and the very founding moment of the United States.
And it's worth mentioning where this comes from.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
All of this is based on a powerful new analysis. We the People, Republic Must Reborn by Dr. Ryan Baidya.
Right. It draws from extensive research on constitutional law, history, modern political science. It really offers a fresh, vital perspective on this foundational document.
So let's dig into this problem of rigidity first. Where should we start? Maybe with the framers' original vision.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. They were aiming for a more perfect union, right?
Mhm.
Meticulously balancing order, stability, national unity, individual liberties, popular sovereignty, all of it.
Trying to get the balance just right.
Exactly. Their goal was a truly durable framework, something designed to, withstand the test of time.
And it certainly has endured for over 2 centuries. I mean, that's undeniable.
It has. But the core tension that the source highlights is that this incredibly durable framework is now facing, well, profound challenges in adapting.
Adapting to our rapidly evolving needs and values.
Precisely. And nowhere is that tension more evident, really, than in Article V, the amendment process itself.
Yes. Article V.
What's truly fascinating is how deliberately difficult the framers made that process.
It wasn't supposed to be easy.
Not at all. Article V requires a 2/3 vote in both the House and Senate to propose an amendment, or the alternative path, a national convention called by 2/3. That's 34 of state legislatures.
Okay, so 2 ways to propose.
Right. And then once it's proposed, it still needs ratification by 3/4. That's 38 of the states, either by their legislatures or by state conventions. It's a really high bar.
Wow, yeah.
Yep.
That sounds like a lot of hurdles to clear.
It is.
And the intent, as folks like Robert Dahl have noted, was to ensure a broad national consensus, protect minority rights.
Prevent any hasty sort of ill-considered changes.
Right. But the unintended consequence, the source argues, is that it's effectively created a powerful minority veto.
Absolutely. Think about it. Just over 1/3 of the states, and that's only 13 states, regardless of how small their populations are.
Right, population doesn't matter there.
No, they can effectively block an amendment. And even before that, a determined minority in Congress can prevent a proposal from even reaching the states.
So this structural reality means widely desired reforms. I don't know, things like addressing gun violence or climate change. They can be perpetually stalled even if a significant majority of Americans actually support them.
Exactly. It's a structural bottleneck. And the historical record really bears this out.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, since 1789, over 11,000 amendments have been introduced in Congress.
11,000? Wow.
Yeah. But only 27 have actually been successfully ratified.
27 out of 11,000, that's tiny.
It is. And the first 10, the Bill of Rights, were largely a condition of the original ratification, remember?
Right, they were almost part of the initial deal.
Pretty much. The subsequent 17 addressed crucial issues: slavery, voting rights, presidential succession, things like that.
Okay, important stuff.
Definitely. But very few, if any, of these amendments have fundamentally altered the core governmental architecture.
You mean things like the structure of the Senate, the Electoral College, presidential powers?
Exactly. Despite recurring debates about their, democratic fairness or effectiveness, those core structures remain largely untouched by amendment.
It's like if you were to visualize the history of amendments.
Yeah, the source has a chart showing this. You'd see periods of intense activity like right after the Civil War,
Makes sense.
followed by long, long quiet stretches, decades even. It's almost like the Constitution goes dormant in terms of formal change.
That slowdown is truly striking. So the pace has slowed dramatically.
Dramatically.
The last amendment with broad contemporary relevance, that was the 26th, right? Lowering the voting age to 18.
1971.
Okay, 1971. And get this, the 27th, about congressional pay raises.
Uh-huh.
That was ratified in 1992, but it was originally proposed way back in 1789.
Isn't that wild? 2 centuries.
What does that bizarre 2-century-long delay
Yeah.
tell us about the amendment process today? I mean, is it truly a functional mechanism for modern change anymore?
Well, it tells us that amendments are now effectively reserved for moments of profound national consensus or, deep crisis.
Things everyone basically agrees on or when things are falling apart.
Right. Which, in our current political climate, well, those moments are increasingly rare.
So what does that mean for us today? For issues that desperately need constitutional adaptation, like, I don't know, digital rights, data privacy, the climate crisis?
It means they're simply left unaddressed at the foundational level. We're forced into piecemeal, often inefficient, solutions through laws or court decisions.
Or they just don't get addressed at all.
Or they're left completely unaddressed, which forces the system to adapt in other, sometimes less democratic ways.
And beyond just Article V's inherent difficulty, the source points out that our contemporary political dynamics are actually accelerating this constitutional gridlock, aren't they?
Oh, they absolutely are. I mean, look at political polarization. We've seen a dramatic increase in partisan sorting, ideological extremism. Pew Research Center has documented this extensively.
Right. Everything's team sport now.
Which makes the kind of bipartisan consensus needed for amendments nearly impossible to achieve.
And what about checks and balances? They were designed to prevent tyranny.
But now they often contribute to gridlock. The branches seem geared more towards obstructing each other rather than cooperating on big issues.
It's like the system's own safeguards are now blocking progress. The cure is part of the disease, maybe?
In a way, yes. Precisely. And add to that the rise of identity politics. Constitutional disagreements aren't just policy debates anymore.
They feel existential.
They become existential clashes. It hardens positions, making structural change exceedingly difficult. It's not just, I disagree with your policy, it's, your view threatens my fundamental identity or values. Compromise becomes incredibly rare in that environment.
So what are the real-world consequences of all this rigidity?
Yeah.
Like, give me a concrete, maybe unexpected way this impacts our daily lives or the issues we care most about.
Well, the source points directly to a significant erosion of trust. That's a big one.
Trust in government.
Yeah. When citizens feel powerless, unheard, unable to affect change through the formal mechanisms, it inevitably leads to declining trust in institutions. Gallup data backs this up consistently.
And that's not just abstract, right? That affects everything.
Absolutely. It means people lose faith in government's ability to solve problems, whether it's public health initiatives, economic policy, infrastructure, you name it. And when those formal adaptation mechanisms are blocked, pressure builds. Frustration mounts. That can lead to increased political instability.
People looking for answers outside the system, maybe?
Potentially. And frankly, a system that feels out of sync, that can't adapt, risks losing its legitimacy and relevance over time. It could become more of a historical artifact than a living blueprint for governance.
And this rigidity also, as you mentioned, sort of locks in potentially undemocratic structures.
Yeah.
Like the Electoral College.
Exactly. Or the malapportioned Senate where, Wyoming has the same number of senators as California despite a tiny fraction of the population.
Which directly contradicts the principle of one person, one vote.
It does. These structures persist largely because changing them via amendment is just so monumentally difficult.
So if we bring this all together, the amendment process, Article V, as it functions today, it acts less like a fixer for a constantly evolving nation.
And more like an unyielding constraint.
Yeah.
It struggles to meet the unmet aspirations of a really diverse modern populace. It's become a major bottleneck for change.
Okay, let's try a thought experiment now. I want you and everyone listening to imagine stepping out of a time machine. First, you're on the bustling, yet maybe strangely quiet streets of Philadelphia in the late 1790s. Horse-drawn carriages, blacksmiths, vendors. News travels really slowly by letter or word of mouth.
Got it. Different sensory experience.
Totally. Now blink. You're back in the 21st century. maybe on that exact same street corner. But it's roaring with cars, people are staring at smartphones, there's this constant hum of digital activity.
Right. Information overload, constant connection.
It's almost hard to grasp the sheer scale of difference, isn't it? How does that monumental shift directly challenge the very foundations of the Constitution drawn up in that first scenario?
Oh, it challenges it profoundly. Let's just take the rhythm of life, for instance.
Okay.
In the 18th century, life was overwhelmingly rural, dictated by agricultural cycles, a much, much slower pace.
Sun up, sundown, seasons.
Exactly. Entertainment was communal local fairs, barn dances. News took days, even weeks, to travel between cities. And a stark reality check. Life expectancy hovered around 35, 40 years. Infant mortality was maybe 20–30%. A very different relationship with life and death.
Okay, fast forward to the 21st century.
We're largely severed from the sun's rhythm, right?
Yeah.
Work happens in climate-controlled offices or increasingly in digital spaces, anytime, anywhere.
Right. The 9 to 5 feels almost quaint sometimes.
It does. Entertainment is global, instantaneous, on demand. News updates literally minute by minute. The pace of life feels relentlessly accelerated. It's reshaping our sleep, our interactions, even our attention spans.
And life expectancy.
Around 77 years now in the U.S., thanks to a massive medical revolution, vaccines, antibiotics, advanced diagnostics. It's just a completely different human experience from top to bottom.
And the fabric of society itself also transformed.
Dramatically. In the 18th century, society was profoundly hierarchical, exclusionary. Class distinctions were sharp. Race and gender legally codified your role.
Yeah.
Approximately 17.8% of the population, nearly 700,000 people, were enslaved Africans. That's a huge number.
A foundational, tragic reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Women had severely limited legal and political rights, couldn't vote, hold office, often couldn't own property independently. Indigenous peoples were largely excluded, seen as separate nations or obstacles.
But the 21st century, thankfully, is a different story in many ways.
A very different story. Slavery abolished by the 13th Amendment. Women gained voting rights with the 19th Amendment. Participate in all aspects of public life now.
Big changes.
Huge. The civil rights movement led to greater legal equality for racial minorities. The LGBTQ plus rights movement has pushed for recognition and rights. The very definition of we the people has expanded exponentially compared to 1787.
The sheer numbers, the demography really underscores this transformation, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Look at the first census. Around 1790, total population was about 3.9 million.
Kangi. Less than a medium-sized city today.
Right. Over 95% lived along the Atlantic coast. Overwhelmingly rural, maybe 5% urban. The population was primarily of European descent.
And that figure of 700,000 enslaved people.
A massive proportion. And indigenous peoples weren't even counted in that 3.9 million.
Okay, now contrast that with today. April 2025, roughly.
Total population is around 340 million people.
Wow. Almost 100 times larger.
Yeah. Widely dispersed across the entire continent. About 83% living in urban and suburban areas now.
Huge shift from rural to urban-suburban.
Massive. And we're one of the most racially and ethnically diverse nations on Earth. White non-Hispanics are projected to be less than 60% of the population soon. Immigration is a major driver of growth. And we have an aging population profile.
So what's absolutely vital to grasp here, the source argues, is the sheer scale of the constitutional mismatch.
Exactly. A constitution meticulously crafted for 4 million mostly agrarian, relatively homogenous people living along the coast.
Both fundamentally challenged when applied to a society of 340 million diverse, urban, globally connected, digitally immersed people spread across a continent.
The context has shifted almost beyond recognition.
And this leads to clear points of friction today.
Yeah.
Things we argue about constantly.
Absolutely. Representation issues are stark. We talked about the disproportionate Senate power, Wyoming versus California.
Right.
The electoral college controversies, like in 2000 and 2016, where the popular vote winner lost the presidency, that shakes faith in the system.
And the ongoing problem of gerrymandering. Political districts drawn specifically to benefit one party.
Which disconnects representatives from the broader electorate. Then there are the challenges of applying 18th century principles to entirely modern issues.
Like the internet, AI, data privacy. How do you fit those into concepts from 1787?
It's incredibly difficult. Global interdependence, too. And our understanding of rights itself continues to evolve.
We're constantly debating how to interpret existing rights, free speech in the digital age, gun rights, equal protection.
And whether the Constitution adequately addresses newer claims for equality, like economic rights or environmental justice, these weren't really on the framers' radar in the same way.
And you mentioned this exacerbates political polarization and gridlock, systemic elements.
Yeah, things like Senate supermajority rules, the filibuster, or winner-take-all elections. They can intensify divisions and make compromise harder in this already changed landscape.
So while amendments have certainly helped address some major issues over time,
No question.
the core framework still carries its 18th century imprint pretty heavily.
Very heavily. Which brings us to a crucial historical parallel the source makes, the 1780s.
Before the Constitution we have now.
Exactly. It's important to remember that the Articles of Confederation, the first governing document, weren't just amended, they were entirely replaced.
Scrapped.
Yeah, because the nation had simply outgrown them. It wasn't working. That decision to convene in Philadelphia and write something new was a truly bold move.
A revolutionary act of constitutional renewal, as the source puts it.
It really was, and it reminds me, too, of Thomas Jefferson's quite radical vision on this.
Oh yeah? What did he say?
He famously asserted, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, that every constitution then and every law naturally expires at the end of 19 years.
19 years. That's incredibly short.
Right. He believed that each generation has the fundamental right, even the duty, to adapt its governing framework to its own needs and circumstances.
He was worried about the dead hand of the past controlling the present.
Deeply cautious about it. And if we connect this thinking to the bigger picture today, the source argues we see striking parallels between our current challenges and the crisis of the 1780s.
Okay, like what?
Well, consider economic disparities. The 1780s saw economic chaos, states printing their own money, no power to tax effectively, no unified currency, culminating in things like Shays' Rebellion.
Right, instability fueled by economic hardship.
Exactly. That finds a powerful echo, the source argues, in today's historic levels of wealth inequality.
Oh.
The top 1% holds over 30% of the nation's wealth now.
That's a huge concentration.
It is. And the source suggests a renewed framework needs to seriously consider, including provisions for economic justice, things like basic rights to housing, healthcare, livable wages, to address these deep divides that fuel instability, much like in the 1780s.
Okay, what else? Mistrust of government.
Yeah, the widespread mistrust and fragmentation we see now. In the 1780s, it was often states undermining the weak national government's purpose.
Right, competing interests.
Today, that fragmentation runs along partisan, ideological, and socioeconomic lines. We mentioned the Pew Research data. Only about 20% of Americans trust the federal government most of the time.
That's a really concerning level of cynicism about the system itself.
It absolutely is. And think about the effectiveness of the governing framework. The articles lacked a real executive or a national judiciary. Big problem.
Couldn't enforce laws effectively.
Right. Today, despite having a much stronger framework on paper, we see legislative paralysis, gridlock, districts gerrymandered to the point of being uncompetitive, and courts that feel increasingly ideologically entrenched.
So different symptoms, maybe, but a similar underlying problem of governmental ineffectiveness.
That's the argument. The modern inefficiencies, gridlock, and unresponsiveness are arguably no less severe in their impact than the weaknesses faced by the early republic under the Articles.
And external threats. They've just evolved, I suppose.
They have, from, British and Spanish incursions or trade disputes in the 1780s.
To modern digital threats like cyber attacks, massive disinformation campaigns, economic warfare, global pandemics. Things the framers couldn't possibly have imagined.
Exactly. The nature of threats is completely different, requiring different kinds of national responses.
What about social and ideological divides? The Federalists and Anti-Federalists had huge arguments back then.
They did. But crucially, those debates ultimately led to compromise the Constitution itself, the Bill of Rights.
Right. They found a way forward.
Today, however, our deep divisions often seem to lead mainly to paralysis and extremism. Social media echo chambers and electoral systems like winner-take-all often exacerbate these divides rather than bridging them.
So the source argues a renewed constitution would need to tackle this head-on.
Yes, by democratizing participation, ensuring voting access for all citizens, banning partisan gerrymandering, maybe replacing the Electoral College with a direct popular vote. Things aimed at making the system feel more representative and legitimate to more people.
And judicial polarization is another big one you mentioned.
Huge concern. The judiciary, ideally, should be seen as above the political fray, but now it faces deep ideological divides impacting public trust.
Yeah. Confirmation battles are brutal.
Exactly. And the source proposes some potentially radical changes here, things like judicial term limits, say 12 or 18 years instead of lifetime appointments.
Get rid of the lifetime tenure.
That's one idea. Others include nonpartisan nominating commissions to suggest candidates, maybe requiring supermajority confirmation votes in the Senate to encourage more consensus picks, all aimed at depoliticizing the courts.
Okay, so stepping back from these parallels,
Yeah.
what's the fundamental takeaway the source is driving at here?
It's that just as the challenges of the 1780s proved too fundamental for merely amending the Articles of Confederation.
They needed a whole new system.
Right. The argument is that today's systemic issues, the deep polarization, the economic inequality, the governmental dysfunction, the mismatch with modern life, might similarly require bold, comprehensive solutions that go beyond just piecemeal fixes or occasional amendments. It might require a more foundational reevaluation.
That makes perfect sense, framing it historically like that. So let's talk about pathways forward then, pathways to a more perfect union.
Right.
When we revisit the preamble, that phrase, form a more perfect union, the source really emphasizes the word more.
Yeah, more implies an ongoing project, right? An evolving process, not a static claim that perfection was achieved in 1787.
It suggests continuous improvement is baked into the very idea.
Exactly. And if we look globally, constitutional renewal isn't some radical, unheard of idea. It's actually a necessary feature of vibrant democracies elsewhere.
Okay, give me some examples.
So France, for instance, has had something like 16 different constitutions since its revolution in 1789.
16, wow.
Yeah. South Africa adopted a completely new, very progressive constitution post-apartheid. Iceland famously attempted a crowdsourced revision process a few years back.
I remember hearing about that.
Germany's basic law has been amended many times. Japan's post-war constitution, Russia, Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela, Italy, Mexico, even Chile is currently undergoing significant constitutional changes after public demand. Renewal happens.
Okay, so America's Constitution, by contrast, has remained largely static, structurally speaking.
In a world that has been anything but static, think about the sheer scale of transformation since 1789. Technological revolutions, the Industrial Revolution, electricity, cars, planes, nuclear power, and now the internet, AI, quantum computing.
Unimaginable back then.
Totally. Economic globalization, the rise and fall of empires, world wars, the climate crisis, massive social evolution too, the abolition of slavery, universal suffrage, civil rights, LGBTQ plus equality, new kinds of weaponry, new security threats.
The world has fundamentally changed multiple times over.
Yet, our basic governmental structures, the Senate giving equal power to tiny and huge states, the Electoral College deciding the presidency, lifetime judicial appointments, they remain largely as they were designed in the 18th century.
And that, the source argues, leads directly to significant dysfunction today.
Yes. It creates friction at almost every level of governance, making it harder to address modern problems effectively.
And that dysfunction is evident in specific structural deficiencies we keep bumping up against. Unequal Senate representation, for example.
Right. 2 senators per state, regardless of population, Wyoming versus California again, it profoundly undermines the democratic principle of one person, one vote at the federal level.
Then there's the dilution of popular sovereignty through the Electoral College.
We've seen it happen presidential elections in 2016, where the person with fewer individual votes becomes president.
Which understandably leads to deep public frustration and questions about legitimacy.
Absolutely. And the disempowerment through state control of elections is another key area. The Constitution gives state legislatures considerable control over voting rules.
And that power has been used, particularly recently, to facilitate things like voter suppression, restrictive ID laws, purging voter rolls, aggressive gerrymandering.
Yeah, we've seen controversial examples in states like Georgia, Texas, North Carolina, among others. It raises serious questions about equal access to the ballot.
What about the judicial branch? Lifetime appointments.
Lifetime appointments without much formal accountability create a judiciary that can feel insulated, sometimes disconnected from contemporary values or the impact of its ruling.
And highly politicized appointments, controversial rulings like Dobbs v. Jackson overturning Roe v. Wade, or Citizens United opening the floodgates for money in politics.
They further erode public trust and the perception of judicial impartiality. It makes the courts feel like just another political battleground.
And let's not forget unchecked presidential powers, the pardon power, for instance.
Right. Originally conceived perhaps as a tool for mercy or national healing.
But it seems increasingly used as a tool to protect political allies, maybe even obstruct justice. We saw examples with Nixon and more recently with associates of Donald Trump.
Which erodes accountability at the highest levels and undermines public trust in the executive branch's integrity.
And those specific judicial decisions you mentioned really illustrate the systemic failure, don't they? Citizens United.
Right. Citizens United v. FEC in 2010. It struck down long-standing limits on independent political expenditures by corporations and unions.
Basically allowing unlimited money to flood into elections, often undisclosed dark money.
Vastly increasing the influence of wealth in politics, many argue. And then Shelby County v. Holder in 2013.
That gutted a key part of the Voting Rights Act.
Exactly. It invalidated the formula used to determine which states and localities needed federal preclearance or approval before changing their voting laws based on histories of discrimination.
And the result?
A wave of new, often restrictive voting laws were passed very quickly in many of those previously covered jurisdictions, arguably making it harder for minority citizens to vote. These decisions, rooted in constitutional interpretation, show how the current framework can actively work against democratic inclusivity or fairness.
The source also points out, interestingly, several missed moments for constitutional renewal throughout American history. Times when big changes could have happened.
Yeah, that's a compelling point. Post-Civil War Reconstruction, for instance, we got crucial amendments, yes, at 13th, 14th, 15th.
Abolishing slavery, defining citizenship and equal protection, voting rights for black men.
Hugely important. But Reconstruction was ultimately cut short, and deeper systemic racial injustices were allowed to remain and fester for another century. No fundamental restructuring of power occurred.
Okay. What other moments?
The Industrial Revolution and the Gilded Age, massive economic and social upheaval, but no real constitutional modernization to address corporate power or worker rights.
The Great Depression and the New Deal era. Huge government expansion. Fundamental shifts in the federal rule.
But again, no corresponding constitutional realignment to reflect these new realities, mostly done through legislation and court interpretations.
Post-World War II. America as a global superpower.
Yet we retained outdated electoral and governance systems. And even the civil rights movement, which brought enormous social transformation through legislation and activism,
didn't result in significant changes to the constitutional frameworks themselves. Those remained largely static.
Exactly. So the argument is we've had multiple junctures where fundamental reform might have been logical, even necessary, but the path wasn't taken due to that inherent rigidity.
And the costs of this stagnation today are pretty clear, the source argues.
Yeah. Deepening inequality, we mentioned the wealth gap, top 10% controlling nearly 70% of wealth, bottom 50%, just 2%.
Rampant political polarization, plummeting trust in nearly all major institutions. Congress, the Supreme Court, the presidency.
It all connects, and it arguably leads to an inadequate crisis response, whether it's pandemics, climate change, economic shocks. America's political system often struggles to react effectively or decisively to modern challenges because of these inbuilt constraints and divisions.
Okay, so given all this inertia, this difficulty, what are the strategic pathways for reform that the source actually outlines? How could change realistically happen?
Well, it highlights several possibilities, acknowledging the challenges of each. First, there's the one actually in the Constitution, an Article V Convention of the States.
The second method we talked about earlier, states calling a convention to propose amendments, bypassing Congress entirely.
Exactly. This has the historical precedent of the 1787 Philadelphia Convention itself, which replaced the Articles. It's the most direct constitutional route to fundamental change.
But what are the major hurdles or fears there?
The primary one is often called the runaway convention fear, meaning delegates, once convened, might exceed their specific mandate, potentially opening up the entire Constitution for revision, not just addressing one issue. That alarms many people across the political spectrum. There are no clear rules for how such convention would operate.
Okay, so high potential, but also high risk or uncertainty. What else?
Another pathway mentioned is a popular constitutional movement. Think grassroots efforts.
Like outside the formal system?
Yeah. Drafting and popularizing a model 21st century constitution, building moral legitimacy and public demand for change. Kind of like what Chile and Iceland explored recently. This route focuses on public engagement, education, and building consensus from the ground up outside traditional political channels.
Interesting. More of a long game, maybe?
Potentially. Then there are tactical legislative reforms. These are changes you can make within the existing framework, using simple legislation, not constitutional amendment.
Okay, like what kind of things?
Things like Congress potentially expanding the size of the Supreme Court or enacting national voting standards to override restrictive state laws, or ending the filibuster in the Senate, which requires a supermajority for most legislation.
Right, the 60-vote threshold.
Exactly. Or granting statehood to places like Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, which would change Senate representation. Even reforming the Electoral Count Act, the law governing how electoral votes are counted, which was done recently to clarify things after January 6th.
So using existing legislative tools to make significant changes.
Right. Working within the system, but pushing its boundaries. And related to that is state-level innovation and compact agreements.
States as laboratories of democracy, as Justice Brandeis said.
Precisely. States can experiment with things like ranked choice voting, independent redistricting commissions to combat gerrymandering, public campaign financing systems.
Things that might eventually bubble up or build momentum for national change.
Exactly. And also interstate compacts, like the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact.
That's where states agree to award their electoral votes to whoever wins the national popular vote, right? But it only kicks in if enough states join to guarantee the winner.
Correct. It's a clever way to potentially bypass the Electoral College without needing a constitutional amendment, if it reaches critical mass.
And what about the courts? Can they play a role?
Judicial interpretation and reinterpretation are always possibilities. Pushing for new legal arguments, new ways of interpreting existing provisions like the Equal Protection Clause regarding gerrymandering or the First Amendment regarding corporate political spending. Court decisions can shift the landscape significantly, as we've seen.
So basically advocating for judges to see the Constitution in a new light based on modern realities.
In essence, yes. And finally, the source mentions a broader philosophical and civic reframing.
What does that mean?
It means igniting a national conversation about the Constitution's status, challenging the idea that it's a sacred, untouchable text, an expired contract, as Jefferson might suggest, questioning the notion of sacred constitutional permanence and building public will for potentially a new founding moment, or at least significant renewal.
Shifting the culture around how we even talk about the Constitution.
Exactly. It involves a fundamental shift in how we view the document itself as a tool meant to serve the living, not a set of chains forged by the dead.
That's a lot of potential paths, from inside the system to completely outside. Of all these, which does Dr. Baidya's analysis suggest holds the most promise or perhaps faces the most significant immediate hurdles?
Well, Dr. Baidya's work really emphasizes that a multifaceted approach is likely necessary. There's probably no single silver bullet.
Makes sense.
While an Article V convention presents significant challenges due to that runaway fear and lack of precedent, it's also constitutionally the most direct path to fundamental structural change if consensus could ever be reached to call one responsibly.
But the political hurdles are immense.
Immense. However, building a popular constitutional movement is seen as crucial, maybe foundational, for creating the necessary political will for any path to succeed, whether it's legislative reforms or even eventually a convention. Public demand is key.
So grassroots mobilization is vital.
Vital. Tactical legislative reforms and state-level innovations are also seen as really important incremental steps. They can build momentum, test new approaches, deliver tangible improvements, even within the existing flawed framework. They show change is possible.
So lots of angles to push from.
Exactly. The clear message, though, overarching all of this, is that constitutional renewal is not optional. It's essential for the health of the republic. The source strongly advocates for establishing a tradition of reviewing and revising the Constitution every generation, say, every 20 to 30 years as a routine, expected part of our democratic process, not some terrifying once-in-several-centuries event.
Making adaptation normal, not exceptional. So, to end where we began, let's recall Thomas Jefferson's really powerful argument that the earth belongs always to the living generation.
Yeah.
And that the living have not just the right, but maybe the moral obligation to shape their own system of government to meet their needs.
It's a profound thought. And the source concludes that the future of American democracy really hinges on our collective capacity to move beyond just diagnosing the rigidity.
We know the problems.
Right. And to actually embrace the difficult strategic work of continuous self-correction. It's not about dishonoring the past or the framers' achievements.
Not at all.
It's about empowering the present and preserving a functional, legitimate democratic future for we the people of today and tomorrow.
So here's a final thought to leave everyone with, something to chew on. If the framers themselves, people who showed incredible spirit of innovation and adaptation, by scrapping the Articles of Confederation entirely, creating something radically new for their time. If they were alive today, seeing our dramatically transformed nation and the challenges we face, would they really counsel sticking rigidly to every detail of the 1787 design? Or would they not demand a similarly bold constitutional renewal for our time?
That's the question, isn't it? Would their spirit lead them to preserve the artifact or preserve the ideal of a government that serves its people?
Something to think about.